It was Maya's 5th birthday, and my mother-in-law, Diane, was already 2 glasses of Chardonnay deep by the time the first kid showed up. You have to understand something about Diane. She lives in this big colonial house in Weston, the kind with a circular driveway and a kitchen island bigger than my first apartment. She hosts the book club, runs the neighborhood watch, and still finds time to remind me, her son's wife, that I come from a town with more pawn shops than Starbucks. I married her son anyway. His name's Eric. Good man. Kind of quiet, kind of beaten down by 35 years of being Diane's only child. He loves me, loves our daughter. But when his mother talks, he shrinks. Happens every time. Like a plant without water. The party was supposed to be in the backyard. I'd spent the whole morning stringing unicorn banners between the maple trees, setting up the bounce house, arranging cupcakes in the shape of a rainbow. I'd invited 12 kids from Maya's preschool, plus their parents. I wanted this to be perfect. Not for Diane, for Maya. She deserved one day that wasn't about adult tension. And then the weather turned. By noon, the sky looked like someone had pulled a gray blanket over the sun. Wind came first, then the kind of cold October drizzle that gets into your bones. I told everyone we'd move the party into the garage. It's a 3-car garage, heated, with an epoxy floor. Cleaner than most people's living rooms. I'd already set up folding tables, a craft station, the whole thing. It wasn't what I'd imagined, but it would work. That's when I heard Diane's voice cut through the chatter of parents and kids. She was standing in the doorway between the house and the garage, holding Maya's little pink coat between 2 fingers like it was a dead mouse. "Whose is this?" she asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. I turned. "It's Maya's. I just put it on the bench." "It's wet," she said. "And it smells like wet dog. In my house." The word "my" landed like a push. I took a breath, tried to keep my voice steady. "Diane, please. Let's just put it in the mudroom. I've got towels." She didn't put it in the mudroom. She didn't hand it to me. She walked right past me, through the garage, out the side door, and into the drizzle. I followed, because that's what you do when you can't believe what your eyes are showing you. She walked about 20 feet into the back lawn, the grass already slick with rain, and she dropped Maya's coat. Not tossed. Not hung on a chair. Dropped it. On the wet grass. Like it was garbage. Then she came back inside, wiped her hands on her designer jeans, and smiled at the other mothers. "Sorry about that. I can't stand clutter." My daughter was standing 3 feet away. She watched her grandmother throw her coat outside. Her little face crumpled, not in a tantrum way, but in that way kids do when they're trying to figure out if a grown-up is joking or just mean. I picked Maya up. She was shaking slightly, maybe from cold, probably from confusion. I held her against my chest and walked past Diane without saying a word. I couldn't say anything. Not yet. Because if I opened my mouth, the dam would break, and I didn't want to be the crazy daughter-in-law who screamed at a child's birthday party. Eric came around the corner with a tray of hot dogs. He saw my face, then his mother's face, and he did what he always does. He looked at the floor. "What's going on?" he asked, like he didn't already know. "Your mother threw Maya's coat on the lawn," I said, low, just for him. He blinked. "I'm sure she didn't mean it like that." That's when I knew I was alone in that house. Completely alone. I carried Maya upstairs to the guest bathroom. I sat on the closed toilet lid, she sat on my lap, and I told her about 5 times that Grandma was just tired, that Grandma loved her very much, that sometimes grown-ups do silly things. She nodded, but her eyes were far away. 5 years old, already learning to make excuses for the adults around her. The party went on downstairs. I heard the squeals, the pop of balloons, the polite laughter of parents who didn't know what they'd just witnessed. When we came back down, Diane was cutting the cake like nothing had happened. She offered me a slice with a smile that said, "I dare you to make a scene." I didn't make a scene. I ate the cake. I sang happy birthday. I smiled for photos. Because that's what you do when you're outnumbered and outranked and holding on to your dignity by a thread. But while I was smiling, something shifted in me. I remembered something. Something Diane didn't know. Something even Eric had probably forgotten. Before Eric and I were married, when we were just two kids in our early 20s, broke and in love and certain we'd figure it all out, I'd made a will. Sounds morbid, I know. But I had a small inheritance from my grandmother, about $30,000, and I wanted it to go somewhere if anything happened to me. So I went to a lawyer, an old family friend named Charles Okafor, and wrote a simple will. It said that everything I owned would go to Eric. Sweet, right? Young love. We never updated it. After we got married, after Maya was born, life just rolled over us. I forgot about the will entirely. Eric probably did too. It was just a piece of paper in a filing cabinet somewhere. But here's what Diane didn't know, standing there in her $500 sweater, cutting cake for children she'd probably already mentally ranked by zip code. She didn't know that will gave Eric, not Diane, not the family trust, not the Weston house, control of my estate. She didn't know that Charles Okafor was still practicing, still in the same office, still holding that original document. And she definitely didn't know that Charles and I had stayed in touch. He went to my church. His daughter was in Maya's preschool class. We were friends. Later that afternoon, after the last guest had left and the dishwasher was humming and Eric was out in the garage collapsing the bounce house, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Diane. She was polishing the granite countertop with a microfiber cloth, her back to me. That was a nice party, she said without turning around. A little chaotic, but nice. I didn't answer. She kept polishing. You know, sweetheart, I really think you should consider getting Maya a better winter coat. Something that actually repels water. I saw one at Nordstrom last week, very reasonable. There it was. The dig, wrapped in advice, tied with a bow of condescension. I looked out the window. Maya's coat was still on the lawn, a sad pink lump in the fading light. I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Charles Okafor's number. My thumb hovered over the text button for a good 10 seconds. Then I typed, "Hey Charles, weird question. Do you still have my old will on file? The one from before I married Eric?" His reply came back in less than a minute. Pulled it up. Still valid actually. Why? Can you meet me tomorrow? I typed. I need to understand something. Of course. How's 10 a.m.? I put my phone in my pocket. Diane was still talking about coats, about the Nordstrom sale, about how important it was for children to look put together. I wasn't listening anymore. My mind was racing down a different road entirely. See, I'd spent 7 years trying to earn Diane's respect. 7 years of being polite, of dressing right, of hosting holidays that met her standards. 7 years of letting her treat my home like an extension of her kingdom. And in one afternoon, she'd shown me exactly what she thought of me, of my daughter, of our place in her world. Maya's coat on the lawn was more than an insult. It was a declaration of war. That night, after we'd put Maya to bed and Eric had fallen asleep with the TV still on, I sat in the dark living room and thought about what I actually wanted. Not revenge, exactly. I didn't need to burn Diane's house down. I didn't need to humiliate her in the church parking lot. But I needed to show her, and Eric, and maybe myself, that I wasn't the doormat she thought I was. The will was a seed. A small, forgotten document that had the potential to crack the entire foundation of Diane's confidence. Because Diane's confidence was built on one assumption, that she controlled everything. The money, the property, the narrative. She controlled Eric, and through Eric, she controlled me. But what if I could flip that script? What if I could make her see, in a way she couldn't ignore, that her power was an illusion? That the law, the actual paper and ink law that she'd always assumed was on her side, might have something different to say? I knew what Eric would do if he found out. He'd panic. He'd ask me to let it go, to keep the peace, to think about Maya. And he wouldn't be wrong. But here's the thing about keeping the peace with a bully, it doesn't work. It just teaches them that the cost of bullying is low. I wasn't going to teach Diane that anymore. I picked up my phone again and texted Charles one more time. Actually, I need more than understanding. I need a plan. Then I went to the back door, stepped out into the cold, damp night, and walked across the lawn. Maya's coat was still there, soaked through, with bits of grass clinging to the hood. I picked it up, held it against my chest, and stood there for a long moment. The coat was just a coat. It could be washed. But what Diane had done couldn't be undone with laundry detergent and a spin cycle. She'd crossed a line that mothers and daughters-in-law have been crossing for generations, but she'd done it in front of everyone. She'd chosen the stage and the audience. And now? Now she was going to find out what happened when the quiet daughter-in-law decided to write her own script. I brought the coat inside, hung it over the laundry room sink, and went to bed. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. A new kind of day. The first day of whatever came next. Charles Okafor's law office was on the second floor of a brick building downtown, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. I'd passed it 100 times driving through town, never once thinking I'd be sitting in the waiting room at 10 in the morning on a Sunday, clutching a damp manila folder with my whole married life inside it. The receptionist wasn't there, Sunday, obviously, but Charles had told me to come around back and use the side entrance. He was waiting at the top of the stairs, a big man in his late 50s with gray at his temples and the kind of calm face that made you feel like everything was going to be okay, even when it obviously wasn't. "Emma," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was warm and solid. "I've got coffee. You look like you need it." "Been a long night," I said. "I figured. Come on in." His office was cluttered in a comfortable way, stacks of files on the floor, a basketball signed by his daughter's middle school team, a window that looked out over Main Street. He motioned me to a chair that squeaked when I sat down, then handed me a mug that said "World's Okayest Lawyer." I almost laughed. Almost. "So," he said, settling behind his desk, "you said on the phone this was about your will. The one you signed before you married Eric." "Yeah." I opened the folder, pulled out the copy I'd made years ago. The paper was starting to yellow at the edges. "I need to understand what this actually means. Legally. Right now. Today." Charles leaned back, took a sip of his coffee, and studied me for a moment. He'd known Eric since they were kids. His daughter Nia and Maya were in the same kindergarten class. He'd been at the barbecue last summer when Diane spent 20 minutes explaining to me that I was using the wrong kind of charcoal. He knew exactly what kind of family I'd married into. "This about yesterday?" he asked. "Nia told me Maya's party got interesting." Interesting. I let out a breath that was half laugh, half something else. "Yeah, you could call it that." Diane threw Maya's coat on the lawn. In the rain. In front of everybody. Because I forgot to hang it in the mudroom. Charles didn't react, just nodded slowly. The way lawyers do when they're filing information away for later. "I need you to tell me," I said, "if this will still holds up. And if it does, what it means for Diane." He picked up the document, put on his reading glasses, and spent maybe 5 minutes going through it. I sat there, listening to the clock on his wall tick, watching the rain run down the window. Same rain that had soaked Maya's coat. Same rain that had been falling when I picked it up off the lawn and decided I was done being the quiet one. Finally, he set the paper down and took off his glasses. "Okay," he said. "Here's the thing, Emma. This will is valid. It was properly witnessed, notarized, the whole 9 yards. And I specifically remember drafting it with language that would survive a marriage, which was unusual, but you were pretty insistent at the time." I remember. I wanted to make sure that if anything happened to me, what I had would go to the person I chose. Not just get folded into Eric's family trust. "Well, you did it." He tapped the paper. This will hasn't been revoked by anything you've signed since. Which means, right now, as of this morning, if something were to happen to you, everything you own goes to Eric. Not to the Weston Family Trust. Not to Diane to manage. Directly to Eric, as an individual. I felt something shift inside me. Like a door opening that I hadn't even known was locked. But here's where it gets interesting, Charles continued. And I mean really interesting. You've been married 7 years. In this state, marital property laws are pretty clear. But you kept separate accounts, right? The inheritance from your grandmother? Yeah. Diane tried to get me to put it in the family trust. I said no. That had been a fight. One of the first big ones. Eric had spent 3 days not looking me in the eye after that. And the business? The little bookstore you've been running? In my name. Only my name. I'd insisted on that too. Everyone thought I was being paranoid. Even my own mother told me I was being difficult. But something in me, some little voice I'd learned to listen to back when I was a kid watching my dad walk out, had told me to keep things separate. Charles smiled. Not a warm smile. A lawyer's smile. The kind that said, I see where this is going, and I like it. So what you're telling me, I said slowly, is that I've got a legal document that treats me and Eric as separate entities. And if I died tomorrow, my assets would bypass Diane's control entirely. Not just bypass. They'd be outside the trust. Outside her reach. Eric could do whatever he wanted with them, and knowing Eric, he'd probably do the right thing. But Diane? She couldn't touch a penny without going through him. And the trust documents are set up so that Eric has to vote with Diane on major decisions. But personal assets? Those aren't trust assets. Those are his. Yours. Yours to his. I sat with that for a minute. The whole Weston family structure was built on control. Diane controlled the trust. The trust controlled the money. The money controlled everyone else. Eric's sister Karen stayed in line because the trust paid for her kids' private school. Eric stayed in line because he'd been in line for 35 years and didn't know any other way to stand. And me? I was the outsider who'd married in, the daughter of a public school teacher and a mechanic, the one who didn't belong. But this will. This little piece of paper from 7 years ago. It was a crack in the foundation. A crack that Diane didn't even know existed. What happens if I update it? I asked. If I change the beneficiary? Then you can direct your assets wherever you want. Maya's education fund. A charity. Me, if you're feeling generous. He grinned, then got serious again. But Emma, here's what you need to understand. The will itself, it's not a weapon. It's a piece of paper. What matters is that Diane doesn't know about it. And the minute she finds out, she's going to do everything she can to make sure it goes away. Can she? Legally? No. She can't force you to change your will. But we both know Diane Weston doesn't operate on what's legal. She operates on what she can pressure, manipulate, or buy. I thought about Eric. About what would happen when I told him. Because I was going to have to tell him, eventually. This wasn't just about me and Diane. This was about my marriage. About whether Eric was going to choose his mother or his wife. I'd spent 7 years avoiding that question. 7 years telling myself that it didn't have to be a choice, that we could find a middle ground, that if I just tried harder, compromised more, smiled wider, things would get better. But things hadn't gotten better. They'd gotten worse. And yesterday, watching Maya's coat land in the wet grass, I'd finally understood that there was no middle ground. There was no compromise that would make Diane respect me. Because she didn't want to respect me. She wanted to control me. And control, real control, doesn't leave room for anything else. Okay, I said. So here's what I'm thinking. And tell me if this is crazy. I'm listening. I want to make some changes to the will. Specific changes. But I don't want them to take effect right away. I want there to be a waiting period. A window where I can show Diane what's coming if she doesn't back off. Charles raised an eyebrow. You're talking about a revocable transfer with a delayed execution date? Something that gives you leverage in the present? I'm talking about whatever legal language makes Diane Weston understand that for the first time in her life, she's not the one holding all the cards. I leaned forward. I don't want to destroy her, Charles. I don't want to tear the family apart. But I want her to know, I mean really know, in a way she can't ignore, that if she keeps treating me like something she can just wipe off her shoe, there are going to be consequences. Real ones. Ones that affect the thing she cares about most. The money. The money. And the control that comes with it. Charles was quiet for a long time. He looked out the window, looked at the will on his desk, looked at me. Then he nodded. I can draft something. Give me a couple days. But Emma, you need to be sure. Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. Diane's not going to forgive you. And Eric. He hesitated. Eric might not either. I know. My voice came out steadier than I felt. But I've been trying this the nice way for 7 years. 7 years of apologizing for things that weren't my fault. 7 years of making myself smaller so she could feel bigger. And yesterday, my 5-year-old daughter watched her grandmother throw her birthday present in the mud. So no. I'm not doing this the nice way anymore. Charles didn't say anything. He just reached across the desk and put his hand over mine for a second. Then he picked up his pen and started making notes on a legal pad. I sat there in that squeaky chair, watching the rain finally start to let up outside, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the soft, wishful kind. The hard kind. The kind that comes with a plan. When I left the office an hour later, the sun was starting to break through the clouds. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute, looking up at the light coming through, and I thought about Maya. About how she'd asked me last night if Grandma was mad at her. About how I'd told her no, Grandma was just having a bad day. That was the last lie I was going to tell my daughter about Diane Weston. I got in my car and drove home. Home to the house that Diane had helped us buy. Home to the furniture she'd picked out. Home to the life she'd been trying to arrange since the day I said I do. But it wasn't just her home anymore. And it wasn't just her life. It was mine. And I was finally ready to act like it. For the next 3 days, I didn't do anything different. Not on the outside, anyway. I made breakfast. I packed Maya's lunch. I folded laundry while Eric watched the game. I kissed him goodnight and rolled over to my side of the bed and stared at the ceiling until my eyes finally closed. But inside? Inside I was watching everything. Like I'd been walking around my own life with the lights off for 7 years, and somebody had finally flipped the switch. Tuesday afternoon, Diane stopped by unannounced. She does that. She has a key. She's always had a key. I was in the kitchen cutting up vegetables for dinner when I heard the front door open. That sound used to make my stomach tighten. Used to make me stand up straighter, smooth down my shirt, look around to make sure nothing was out of place. Tuesday, I just kept cutting the carrots. Emma. She walked into the kitchen like she owned it. Because in her head, she did. I've been calling. Have you? I didn't look up. Phone must have been on silent. She stood there in her cream-colored blouse, her gold bracelet catching the kitchen light, and I could feel her trying to figure out what was different. Because something was. She could smell it. I wanted to discuss Maya's birthday gift, she said. Since the party was interrupted. That almost got me. Almost. The party wasn't interrupted. She's the one who threw my daughter's coat outside like it was garbage. She's the one who made my 5-year-old ask me if her grandmother was mad at her. But I didn't say any of that. Not yet. I already took care of it, I said. Bought her that art set she wanted. The one with the wooden case. Diane's mouth got tight. That was supposed to be from me. No. I finally looked at her, and I kept my voice calm. Calm like Charles's office. Calm like a plan you've been turning over in your head for 3 days straight. You never mentioned the art set. You mentioned a tennis bracelet. For a 5-year-old. Emma, I don't appreciate your tone. I don't appreciate you having a key to my house. The words just came out. I didn't plan them. But once they were out, hanging there in the air between us, I didn't want to take them back. Diane's eyes went wide for half a second before she pulled herself together. She's good at that. Pulling herself together. 7 years, and I'd never once seen her lose control for more than a heartbeat. This house, she said slowly, was purchased with my son's trust fund. Which I manage. This house is my home. And I'm asking you to give me back the key. She laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind that's supposed to make you feel small. I don't think so. Then I'll change the locks. You know what silence sounds like when it's full of 7 years of resentment? It's loud. Louder than yelling. We stood there in that kitchen, and I could hear every single thing that wasn't being said. Finally Diane picked up her purse from the counter. Her knuckles were white around the strap. Eric will hear about this. Good, I said. He should. He's my husband. He should know what's going on in his own house. She left. The front door closed harder than it needed to, and I stood there with my heart pounding and my hands shaking, but I was smiling. Actually smiling. Because that was the first time. The first time in 7 years I didn't fold. Didn't apologize. Didn't make excuses. That night, Eric came home late. I was in bed when I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heavier than usual. He stopped in the doorway of our bedroom, loosening his tie. My mother called me at work. I figured she might. She said you threatened to change the locks. I did. He stood there in the half-dark, and I could see him trying to understand what was happening. Eric's not a bad man. He's not. He just never learned how to stand up to his mother. Nobody ever taught him that loving someone meant protecting them, even from family. Why? He finally asked. Because I'm done, Eric. Done with what? With pretending. I sat up in bed, pulled the covers around me. With letting your mother treat our daughter like she's a guest she can throw out when she's unhappy. With letting her treat me like I'm temporary. Like if she waits long enough, I'll just disappear. She doesn't, Eric. I said his name the way Charles said it in his office. Like he was a man who needed to hear the truth. At Maya's birthday party, your mother threw her coat outside. In the rain. Because your father said something she didn't like. She took it out on a 5-year-old. He went quiet. I could see him processing it. His mother had told him some version of that story, I was sure. Some cleaned-up version where it was all a misunderstanding. Is that true? Maya asked me later if Grandma was mad at her. Our daughter thought she did something wrong. That got him. Something shifted in his face. He sat down on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands. What do you want me to do? Nothing, I said. I'm not asking you to do anything. This is mine to handle. What does that mean? I reached over to my nightstand and pulled out the envelope. The one from Charles. It had arrived by courier that morning, and I'd been carrying it around all day like a grenade with the pin still in. This is a copy of my will, I said. The one I wrote before we got married. It's still valid. Charles confirmed it. Eric looked at the envelope like it was a snake. Why are you showing me this? Because I'm going to show it to your mother. And I wanted you to hear it from me first. I told him everything. About how my grandmother's money never went into the family trust. About how the bookstore in town? The one I'd been running for 6 years? That was mine too, bought with my inheritance, never part of the Weston portfolio. About how if something happened to me, all of it went to him directly, not through any trust his mother controlled. And if I modify this will, I said, I can direct those assets anywhere I want. Maya's education fund. A charity. I could leave everything to the public library if I felt like it. Your mother gets nothing. Controls nothing. Eric stared at me. You're going to threaten her with money? No. I shook my head. I'm going to show her what happens when you spend 7 years trying to control someone's life. When you treat your daughter-in-law like she doesn't belong. When you throw your granddaughter's coat outside in the rain. Emma, this will destroy her. No, it won't. That's the point. Charles is drafting a modified version of the will. The new version doesn't take effect for 30 days after I sign it. That gives your mother 30 days to decide what matters more to her. Control or family. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind was picking up, and I could hear the old oak tree scratching against the window. That tree that Diane had wanted to cut down when we moved in. I'd fought her on that too. She's my mother, Eric said finally. I know. And you're my wife. I know that too. He reached over and took my hand. 7 years of marriage, and that hand still felt like home. Even when things were hard. Even when his mother made everything harder. What do you need from me? I squeezed his hand. Just be there. When I tell her. I need you to be there and not try to stop me. 3 days later, we sat in Diane's living room. The formal one, with the white couches nobody was allowed to sit on and the grand piano she never played. Everything in that room was expensive and nothing in it felt lived in. Charles was there. Eric was beside me on one of those white couches, his hand on my knee. And Diane sat across from us, looking at the copy of my will like it was written in a language she didn't understand. I don't understand, she said. Which was funny, because she understood perfectly. Diane Weston understood money the way most people understand breathing. It's simple, Charles said, his voice calm and professional. Emma's premarital assets have always been separate from the family trust. Her grandmother's estate, the bookstore, those were never part of the arrangement you set up. If Emma passes, those assets go directly to Eric. If she changes the will, they go wherever she designates. And she's changing the will? I prepared a revised version, Charles said. It leaves everything to a trust specifically for Maya's education and future. Your son still benefits as Maya's guardian, but the assets are protected. From everyone. He didn't say from you. He didn't have to. Diane's face went pale. You can't do this. I can, I said. But I haven't. Not yet. I pulled out the second document Charles had prepared. The one that mattered. This is the modified will. It's dated and ready to sign. But it doesn't take effect for 30 days after my signature. So here's what's going to happen. I leaned forward, and for the first time in 7 years, I looked at my mother-in-law without flinching. You're going to give me back the key to my house. You're going to call before you visit. You're going to treat my daughter with respect, in my home or yours. And you're going to stop trying to run my marriage like it's one of your investment portfolios. Or what? Or I sign this. I held up the document. And in 30 days, you lose any claim to anything that's mine. You lose the leverage you've been holding over me since the day I married your son. And everyone in this family will know exactly why it happened. The silence in that room was incredible. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. You could hear Diane breathing, short little breaths like she'd been running. You're bluffing, she whispered. Am I? I held her eyes for a long moment. Then I reached for the pen Charles had brought. A nice pen. Heavy. The kind of pen you use when you mean what you're about to do. Emma, wait. It wasn't Diane who spoke. It was Eric. He stood up from the couch, walked over to his mother, and knelt down beside her chair. Took her hand the same way he'd taken mine 3 nights ago. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked a little. "I love you. But I love my wife too. And I love my daughter. And I'm tired of feeling like I have to choose." Diane looked at her son. Really looked at him. And something in her face started to crack. "I didn't mean." She started. "Yes, you did." Eric's voice was gentle. "You always mean it. That's the problem." She started to cry. Diane Weston, who I'd never seen shed a single tear in 7 years, started crying in her formal living room on her white couch. "I just wanted to protect you," she said. "After your father and I separated, I needed." "I know." Eric squeezed her hand. "But I'm not Dad. And Emma's not you. And we need to figure out how to do this differently. All of us." I sat there watching my husband, and I felt something shift inside me. Not victory. Not exactly. Something quieter than that. Like a door opening in a room I didn't know was there. I put down the pen. The will is still in my desk drawer. And signed. The 30-day clock hasn't started yet. Maybe it never will. But Diane gave back her key that afternoon. And last weekend, at Sunday dinner, she asked before she picked my up. Asked. Like a normal person. It's not perfect. Families never are. But 3 nights ago, Maya asked me if Grandma was still mad at her. And I told her the truth. "No, baby. Grandma was never mad at you. She was just figuring some things out." And for once, I wasn't lying.